Washington, D.C. is not a city that happened. It did not slowly evolve from a trading post or expand outward from industry or geography. It was chosen, carved out, and designed from nothing, almost like a stage built before the play begins. In the late 18th century, the United States was fragile, divided, and uncertain about its future. And yet, instead of placing its capital in an already powerful city like New York or Philadelphia, the young nation made a strange decision. It would build an entirely new capital in a swamp on purpose. That decision alone tells us something important. Power in this country would not merely reside where money already existed. It would be created, structured, and symbolized. From the very beginning, Washington, D.C. was meant to represent authority, not convenience. Pierre Charles L'Enfant, the man tasked with designing the city, understood exactly what he was doing. Trained in Europe and deeply influenced by the great imperial capitals of history, he did not design Washington, D.C. as a practical grid alone. Instead, he combined rigid order with dramatic diagonals, long sightlines, and grand open spaces. This was not just urban planning. This was storytelling through stone and distance. Wide avenues were meant to dwarf the individual. Long approaches to buildings were meant to slow the visitor, forcing anticipation and respect. In Washington, D.C., movement itself becomes part of the psychological experience. You do not rush toward power here. You approach it. Unlike organic cities where buildings compete for height and attention, Washington, D.C. enforces restraint. Height limits ensure that no corporate tower overshadows the symbols of government. This creates a skyline that feels calm, controlled, and intentional. Power does not scream here, it watches. This is one of the most important and least discussed aspects of the city. In many global capitals, power announces itself through excess. In Washington, D.C., power presents itself as inevitable, permanent, unchallenged. That feeling is not accidental. It is the result of deliberate design choices made centuries ago and carefully preserved ever since. As you move deeper into the city's core, geometry begins to reveal itself. The National Mall is not simply a park. It is a ceremonial corridor stretching between symbols of legislative authority, executive power, and historical memory. The Capitol sits elevated, visible from multiple approaches, reinforcing the idea that law stands above the city. The White House, by contrast, is positioned slightly off-axis, signaling civilian leadership rather than royal dominance. These placements create a visual hierarchy that mirrors political theory. Even without understanding the details, visitors feel it. Their bodies register the order before their minds do. This use of geometry as power projection is ancient. Empires have always understood that straight lines, symmetry, and scale communicate control. Disorder suggests weakness. Order suggests inevitability. Washington, D.C. borrows heavily from this tradition, blending Roman Republican imagery with Enlightenment rationalism. The result is a city that feels timeless, as though it has always existed, even though it is relatively young. That illusion of permanence matters, because when power feels ancient, it feels legitimate. Monuments within Washington, D.C. take this idea even further. The Washington Monument, a massive obelisk rising from the center of the city, is one of the most striking examples. Obelisks predate the United States by thousands of years. They originate in ancient Egypt, where they symbolize divine authority and eternal power. By placing an obelisk at the heart of the capital, the message becomes layered. This is not just a tribute to a man. It is a declaration of continuity, endurance, and dominance across time. Whether consciously or not, the symbolism connects the American state to the long lineage of empires that understood how to project strength through stone. The Capitol building itself reinforces this narrative. Its dome mirrors Roman architecture, directly referencing the birthplace of Republican governance. This is not subtle. It is intentional. Rome is invoked not because it was perfect, but because it was powerful, organized, and influential beyond its borders. When foreign leaders, diplomats, or adversaries look at Washington, D.C., they are not just seeing American buildings. They are seeing a city speaking the language of empire in a modern accent. This brings us to the myths and why they refuse to disappear. Over time, people began noticing patterns, alignments, symbols embedded in cornerstones and street layouts. Freemasonry, an influential philosophical movement during the nation's founding, emphasized symbolism, geometry, and moral architecture. While many exaggerated claims spiral into conspiracy, the underlying truth is simpler and more interesting. Symbols were a common language among educated elites of the era. They believed buildings could teach values, express ideals, and shape citizens. Washington, D.C. reflects this belief. Even when interpretations differ, the city undeniably operates on a symbolic level. But symbolism alone does not explain why Washington, D.C. holds such gravitational pull in global conflict. To understand that, we must zoom out. Throughout history, capitals have always been more than administrative centers. They are emotional anchors. When Rome fell, it was not just a military defeat, it was the collapse of an idea. When Constantinople was taken, it marked the end of an era. Capitals embody identity. They condense a civilization into a physical form. That is why they become targets. Destroying a capital is not about logistics, it is about meaning. Washington, D.C. functions in exactly this way. It is the visible brain of American power. Military commands, diplomatic decisions, financial regulations, and ideological messaging all radiate outward from this single place. Rival nations understand this. They may never realistically attack it physically, but they attack it rhetorically, symbolically, digitally. Threats aimed at Washington are meant to signal defiance, not feasibility. They are challenges to authority broadcast to the world. Even modern conflicts reflect this obsession. Cyber attacks target government agencies housed in D.C. propaganda videos reference its landmarks. Protest movements focus their imagery on its monuments. The city has become shorthand for the system itself. When people say they oppose Washington, they rarely mean a geographic location. They mean centralized power, elite decision-making, and global influence. That linguistic shift reveals how completely the city has transcended its physical boundaries. In the modern era, Washington, D.C. continues to communicate power through absence as much as presence. The lack of skyscrapers, the deliberate openness, the preserved monuments all suggest stability. In a world where cities race to build taller and louder, Washington remains restrained. That restraint sends a message. This system does not need spectacle to validate itself. It already assumes legitimacy. That assumption is precisely what unsettles rivals. By the time you finish looking at Washington, D.C. through this lens, it becomes clear that the city itself is part of America's soft power arsenal. It intimidates without threatening. It dominates without shouting. It reminds the world that behind the noise of politics, behind the chaos of headlines, there is a carefully constructed center that has been projecting authority for over 200 years. And that is why it is watched. That is why it is referenced. And that is why, even when untouched, it remains one of the most targeted cities on Earth, not because of what stands there, but because of what it represents.